that interview we were meant to have in the first half hour of the show, we have now, of course, moved up. And this, of course, has to do with the extradition of the Gupta brothers from the United Arab Emirates. And, of course, we are just going to get into that right now. I see that pertains to our question of the day, and you have responded to all of that. But we are now joined here by Chrispin Phiri, who is spokesperson for the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, to talk to us about the latest developments here in the Gupta extradition saga. So, Chrispin, thanks so much for coming through. Firstly, let me just start with the establishing of facts. Where are the Gupta brothers? Do we know where they are?
As we understand it, they are still in the UAE. And that's why we actually went up to the UAE to meet with the Minister of Justice there to understand, firstly, how we can resubmit our extradition request, but also, most importantly, to hold them accountable for what we believe was not a proper way of handling the situation in the first place. You would recall, Sakina, that on the 6th of April, we did announce to the nation that we had received communication via the diplomatic channels from the UAE that the Gupta brothers had been acquitted, so to speak, from the extradition process, loosely using the word acquitted here. And so we had only learned this, a good 2 months down the line after they had appeared in a closed court system in the UAE sometime in February. So we went to express our concerns directly with the Minister of Justice there to say that, we really do expect higher levels of cooperation from the UAE because we do have good bilateral relations on many other issues. But most importantly, because we have signed a bilateral agreement as well as a multilateral agreement with them through the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, we really expected better levels of cooperation. And, we got an undertaking from the Minister of Justice from the UAE that firstly they will attend to the time lags in communication and investigate what occasioned that, and we thought that was reassuring. But more importantly, there was an agreement between the two ministers that the law enforcement agencies, the prosecuting authorities of the UAE and the National Prosecuting Authority of South Africa will work a lot more closely together. Not necessarily always going through the diplomatic channels to exchange information, but where necessary, linking up directly to deal with a number of issues. And not just related to the Guptas. You never know, there may be many other mutual legal assistance that we'll require from the UAE, as well as extraditions that we would require or they would require from us. So it's really important that we strengthen our relationships and ensure that the bilateral agreements that we've put in place and the multilateral agreements that we've put in place actually work for both nations, and it's in both nations' interests. And so as of the 15th of June, we know that the prosecuting authorities will be meeting to take this process forward. So
it's the prosecuting authorities on both sides, South Africa and the UAE?
Correct.
So with regard to, once again, establishing exactly where they are, you say you believe they are in the UAE. Are you not able to establish that with the authorities? So, do they not know for certain whether they are in that country or not?
One of the things that we understood from the engagement is that the UAE and actually all migration systems have the system around the world is when you enter a country via a particular passport, you can only leave that country with the same passport. So that's the first thing, and that's one of the things that they would be looking into. And from our side, it doesn't seem as though they left that country using a different passport. But even if they did, the UAE would still have to give us information as to how that happened, because we understand that their residency in the UAE is based on South African citizenship. So if there's been a change in that regard, that is something that the UAE authorities have to bring to our attention as early as this meeting of the 15th.
So the last time this story was foregrounded, it was said that the Gupta brothers had obtained citizenship of Vanuatu and they possess passports in that regard. Have you established anything further in that regard?
We haven't gotten direct information from the UAE in that regard, other than the court judgment itself. And I think this meeting, that's one of the things that it will really establish on the 15th. Of course, that's really technical information that law enforcement agencies will have to drill into by themselves without the minister hovering over them. So we will then get some high-level update as to what that truly entails. But you do know that there are countries like Vanuatu who do sell citizenship. You can go on the website now and buy citizenship for a certain amount of money. So that is a possibility, and in fact it does say so in their judgment. So we would want some level of clarity around that. And it would be interesting to see whether they've actually used that Vanuatu passport at all, because one of the things that they told us was that, in fact, like I say, you can't enter a country and leave a country on a completely different passport.
So the other question then, Chrispin, is what are you going to do differently this time around? Because, as you said, that acquittal, so to speak, of the previous extradition process, what are you going to do this time, do differently to ensure that, you know, the process runs more smoothly? I know you said that a task team has been set up by officials from both sides, but, you know, what else will you be doing differently this time around?
Not only what else, but where are we? So we are ready to go. We have already put our papers together, so it's a matter of really working closely with the prosecuting authorities of the UAE to really make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. We thought that was the case the last time, but clearly now we were then informed that this issue of a cancelled warrant, which was submitted with new warrants, was the technical reason as to why our request was not granted. So we are at a really advanced stage. We are not starting a process right from the beginning. We are raring to go. And it's a matter of working closely, directly with the UAE authorities to really get through the court system.
One of the questions, and I think it stems from where we find ourselves at this point economically, is, of course, how much is the government spending on this particular process? I know many South Africans want to see the Gupta brothers back in this country to actually face the laws of this land, but some are concerned about the cost of getting all of this done. Are you able to give us a figure at this point of how much it's cost?
It's not possible to put a finite figure on an extradition request to any country, because you have dedicated resources in your international relations unit between the NPA and the Department of Justice, constantly working on various matters of extradition. But also to say that restoring the rule of law and holding people accountable has no cost. We must always ensure that we put that in place. And no matter how much it costs, the rule of law must function in every country, whether it's Dubai, whether it's South Africa. Ultimately, the bigger costs, and ultimately when you start speaking of failed states, is when the rule of law doesn't function. So the costs are far outweigh the accountability. You know, we need to ensure that we have an accountable institution. Also, we have accountable institutions that work, and we're able to bring anyone in the world to account to South Africans on something that we believe they've done wrong to South Africans. No matter their age, no matter their race, no matter their creed, the rule of law must function. And no matter what the costs are, we want a rule of law that works for the people.
So getting back to the charges that the Gupta brothers are wanted for in South Africa, you spoke just now about cancelled warrants, new warrants. So what exactly will they be standing trial for? What are they wanted for?
Well, one of the charges that was presented to the court now, we know through the court process, was the charge of money laundering. And interestingly, the UAE courts did say that they have jurisdiction to prosecute them on that, and they intend to do so. So one of the things that the minister did emphasize is that we are ready to charge these people or to prosecute them on that charge. We've done the investigations. If the UAE is saying that they're willing to prosecute them on money laundering, they'll still have to go through the investigation process and so on. So we would really prefer to prosecute them on that charge. But some of the charges, as we would have seen, relate to corruption as well. And that's what the NPA would be then bringing them to account for.
So just finally, in terms of the Gupta brothers themselves, they obviously would try to avoid coming back to South Africa, as they've been evading, you know, being extradited back to South Africa. Just in that regard, what are some of the issues that they could potentially raise to try and halt that process? It's
difficult to foresee. But we do know that people do take up interlocutory applications. For example, in Malawi, we had sent our team of experts who had prepared the papers to go and testify to those papers in the Malawian courts, only to arrive on the day and realize that the fugitive Shepherd Bushiri and his wife had put in an interlocutory application disputing one or two technical things. So it's very difficult to foresee. And in fact, that is the nature of extradition requests. Is people don't want to go and face justice where they're required to face justice. So they'll take up any type of issue up until they've exhausted the legal system in that country. Or even in South Africa, we have cases of people who have been in our country for almost 7 years, taking up issues right up to the Constitutional Court, and then the Constitutional Court would decide that this person is extraditable to country X. Then only that person gets extradited. So it's a protracted process, and people do take their liberties with the justice systems.
What if they offered to pay back what they took from South Africa?
Well, then we'll cross that bridge if it ever comes. But we do have in place actually a non-trial resolution mechanism, which has been very successful with regards to Eskom, for instance. A company called ABB, a multinational company, has paid back 2.5 billion rands to the South African Republic for their acts on corruption, but it doesn't mean that they'll not be prosecuted. So I think that's a decision that the National Prosecuting Authority would have to take.
And just a final question, in the broader scheme of things, what would a successful conviction or, some sort of resolution on this matter with the Gupta brothers mean for South Africa?
I think ultimately have people coming to South Africa to face justice and presenting their version. Remember, we are not saying they're guilty, but there are allegations and very strong allegations against these individuals. And being in a court and presenting their side of the story is the beginning of justice. And what the judicial officer then decides from there is a different story altogether. But presenting yourself to court to face the rule of law is the ultimate victory for all South Africans, because we then get to see exactly what has transpired here. It's no longer conjecture, it's no longer allegations on their own, but it's facts being placed before a judicial officer who then decides the fate of this issue.
So the 15th of June it is, that's next Thursday, when the two sides, those are the teams from South Africa and the UAE, will then meet in order to forge a way forward from where they've already started with regard to the extradition process of the United Arab Emirates of the Gupta brothers. But thanks so much to Justice Minister spokesperson Chrispin Phiri speaking about those very attempts to extradite Atul and Rajesh Gupta from the United Arab Emirates.